What is the value of microservice architecture and integration?
So let's start. Let's go a little back, little bit backwards, and then we will basically build the concept, and then we'll come back to to your question. So we all been through this journey. I mean, we all started off we all used to write Java code and all of that, and then some custom solutions and things like that. But however, people did not like the way we are building the spaghetti code or whatever it was, and then people came up with an idea of service oriented architecture. And then we were introduced to something called Visual, SOAP, and all of those concepts. And then now service oriented architecture is basically something which it helps you build everything at a pace, at a slow pace, where it will take you. It will basically enable you to kind of go slow in a structured way, and then return on investment won't happen overnight. It says you reap the benefits anywhere between 3 to 5 years of time to see the things actually in motion. Okay, that was how it all started. But to be honest, there would be only 10% of SOA related initiatives which really have benefited organizations or enterprises, where they really saw the benefit and then return on investment, whatever investments they have made. And 90% of the projects failed miserably. We all know that, right? Now after that, there are other things came up, you talk about integration, you talk about pub sub models and all of that. And then recently now the buzzword in 2015s and 16s was APIs. Let's write APIs. Let's bring APIs to the to the front, and then let's make APIs popular and things like that. And then when I looked at APIs, I felt like it was all the same SOA, old wine in a new bottle, right? And when I looked at it, the way I understood APIs was APIs were much better because we are doing with REST, because REST is a very lightweight protocol and all of that, you guys know, as you guys know. And then we started developing APIs. And then we are close to MuleSoft. Let's relate it to what we are working on. Let's choose our platform of choice as MuleSoft, right? Anypoint platform. So when you go and define, there are certain principles on which SOA was based on. One, contract first approach. That's what you go and do it on your MuleSoft. Anytime you start an API, you define your API, right? That's what you do in your design center. And then after that, you kind of go and review it, with your business users. And also SOA dictates something. It says IT and business should work together, but not against each other. And most oftentimes, business and IT are against each other, because they say that they feel that you're not giving the right thing to them. And then that's why we introduced something called a review cycle. Design, basically mock your service, show the data to your business user, and then improve the API based on the inputs you're getting back from them. And then that's how you solve the first principle of contract first approach. Now, you also talk about service loose coupling. Now, today you may have today in your organization, you are on a legacy database, Oracle database, but tomorrow you are going towards something like Salesforce or something like that. So, but your contract, you should never have your contract tightly coupled to your database definitions. So which is basically a tight coupling. But if you have an API defined in a way that you can bring all of that from any system, you replace it with tomorrow, that is called loose coupling. And then there is a service abstraction. You have 8 principles: service composition, service statelessness, and then service discoverability, and all of that. So those 8 principles of SOA were very well actually implemented using your Anypoint platform, because you discover your APIs using your exchange. You basically compose your APIs in your process APIs. You have your system APIs, you have your experience APIs, but then you have all of that composed in your. If you want to basically get the data of customer and then customers orders, basically you'll make 2 API calls, and then you basically kind of massage the data and then show this customer has these many number of orders and things like that. So that's what was happening. Now, why microservices? What is a microservice? Microservice is something a small, a targeted thing. Say if I'm talking about accounts, that is one single unit. I can basically develop it as a microservice. The smaller the service, the clarity of data or the clarity of problem you are solving is more, right? You don't want to develop a bulk object a bulk API which has 120 calls in that, and then why did I do this? Where is my code? What am I doing? Readability purpose or maintainability purpose or whatever you talk about, that's not the right approach. So you have to basically kind of look at your APIs, how best I can make my APIs more granular. I mean, you might have heard about coarse grained and fine grained, right? And here, when we talk about microservices, they are fine grained services or fine grained APIs.
So, Aravind, you've drawn a great historical arc from building systems, and we began to identify a way of approaching enterprise software called SOA, service-oriented architecture. It has the word service in it, and you're bringing us to this size question: how big should a service be, right? So there's of course grain and fine grain. So I think the question that I've left over here with me is there's a lot of ways a service could be big. It could use a lot of compute. It could be on a lot of computers. It could have a lot of operations and responsibilities.
Yeah.
And it could have a lot of code. So in what ways, how small does something have to be for you to believe that it deserves the title of microservice?
That's a very good question, Ryan. And then the way I look at the how small or how granular you want to keep your API is basically depending on what is your context there. I mean, I'm introducing a new concept called bounded context model. So bounded context model is something which you need to kind of see, say if I'm solving a problem of the customer domain. The customer could be an enterprise customer, or it could be an individual customer, or it could be a small business customer. But I know it's all one customer, different types of customer, and then different based on the type of customer, the data could be different there, right? So we need to tie our API or that granular API to a context and derive an API from your context.
I think the word microservice to me is more than just API. So what if I made a program, a Java 2 EAR file, this giant program, and it has 10 different APIs. Every one of the little APIs is fine-grained, and it has a small bounded context, but the one program has 10 of those that it implements. which is what we used to do with SOAP a lot of times. We'd have a single giant EAR file with a bunch of WSDLs, right? Does that count as is that 10 microservices, or what do you think that, how does that relate to microservice architecture?
It's about like, how you are packaging, Ryan. I mean, packaging could be different, but essentially if you have like 10 APIs packaged in a big API, that's for you to deploy and then use your resources more efficiently. And then you said like 10 APIs, right? Let me give you an example. In that 10 APIs, for something like say, what is the best example? Product, right? Product may not have more updates, right? Product may not have like a lot of updates, which essentially means that like, you will never invoke your update call on that API. Very rarely. All you have is like, you basically get more requests on GET requests. Get this product by this ID and things like that. And that is the best example I can give.
So that sounds to me like, imagine I've got a restaurant company and I've got a menu with pricing on it. And every time somebody goes in DoorDash, it's going to be a GET request to see my menu. But very like once a week or something, I'm going to go put a new price on a new item. That's what you're talking about?
Actually, once in 2 months, like, once in 3 months. Who will increase price every week? Like, no customer will go to that restaurant.
Yeah. So
and
what is
product is another example. Like, you go to a shop, like, most products are like, very stable actually. Milk. I mean, the price may vary little often. But then like, if you go to a Lowe's kind of a store, like, where you buy a rod or something like that, it may have a very constant cost attached to it, price attached to it, which will change like, once in a year or so.
So are you going to separate the price update into a service and the price read into a different service, or what do you do with that?
It could lie in the same service. All I'm saying is like, you may not invoke all the calls. See, it's a debatable subject, Ryan. I mean, where we can actually group all the GET calls into, you should keep your GET calls probably. Again, it's all about packaging, Ryan. Okay. I can still have the same, all CRUD operations for that particular system API in a single API.
Well, right? Good. I want to return to, I wrote a couple of notes as you were describing kind of the value of SOA. And I want to pay attention to something you brought up about loose coupling.
Right.
So let's say you have 2 clients at Slalom, and one has a lot of loose coupling and the other one does not have a lot of loose coupling. Can you kind of help us? What's the difference between these clients, enterprise IT?
So let me tell you how loose coupling brings value to your architecture. Loose coupling, right? Coupling, basically what you are saying is, I am not tightly tying my definitions of how my data is in my end system or the target system to my API. Essentially what it means is like, say if I have an Oracle database, like, classic example of Oracle database, and the account there is defined in a certain way. And if I take that schema and then write a data model, as it is for that particular API, then I'm very tightly coupling with my fields with that database definition, which essentially means that tomorrow, if I'm replacing the system, I have to write a completely new API. But if I'm not, I have to start from the design part. So if I'm tomorrow, if I have a loose coupling, like, I have written my own data definition based on the standards, like, what an account object should entail to, and all those things, keeping all of those things in mind. And then if I write my API definition, whatever system I'm replacing tomorrow, it doesn't matter. Like, I'll have to go and change the implementation. So that is one example where it adds value. You don't have to spend like, 40 hours. You can only spend like 15 hours or 16 hours to get your work done. All you are changing is like the implementation. You don't have, your testing also becomes easier.
Testing is easier. Labor is less.
Yes.
I think I understood from what you're saying. There's also a reduced risk of some. Can you tell me more about that? Like, if you have loose coupling, what does that do? What kind of risk are you reducing?
A risk of like, I mean, it reduces the risk of like, taking more time and then value to the customer. Like, somebody needs this API immediately, right? ASAP, right? And then they don't have a lot of leeway for a particular customer in waiting for that API to become available.
Sure.
So that's where it adds a lot of value, right?
Good.
And your unit test scripts are like, your unit test scripts or your actually end-to-end testing scripts will not change much.
Right. And they're focused on, instead of a giant thing that has to have lots and lots of test scripts, when I change this,
you're basically focused testing. You can do it actually.
Or there's only so many tests for a small thing that only does a few jobs.
Correct.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, it sounds like what you're talking. When we were imagining this interview, one of the things that we agreed on that it sounds like you're getting at now is there's some lessons from history about after project is over, what do we have to work with? You want to tell
exactly?
Go ahead.
I mean, reusability is something which is a major focus, Ryan. When we talk about microservices, APIs, reusability is the key for your success or for your organizational success. And MuleSoft has coined a term called API network. All I'm trying to do here is like, I'm building these individual APIs. And I'm also kind of like, reusing these APIs in various processes. And that's how I'm basically composing these APIs. I'm doing orchestration of these APIs. And then I'm also managing to show how my data will look like depending on who's my customer. You are also making it drive towards customer centricity, right? That is the key today, right? Like, who will want to look at like, if I give them an API where like, it shows product information for a certain set of audience, right? And then if I don't give them what they really want to look at, it's no use for them.
Customer centricity of the unit of software. What I'm hearing in this whole way of looking at enterprise software is you're happy with MuleSoft's emphasis on APIs, not just as, I mean, it's important that the API is specification first, driven design of the unit of software, but it's not just an interface. It's a real working service that's deployed and running somewhere. And if we want to reuse it, it's right there, and it works. It's not just that we have to like implement it. It's already done. Now we get to keep it and keep using it.
Exactly. And then you may have version changes. You may go and update that API, but then your multiple versions can exist at the same time. And it also helps you define how your deployment. I mean, it also helps you plan your deployments in a better way, in a more efficient manner. That adds a lot of value, Ryan. In my experience, right, like, if you are implementing something and then like, you have this implementation ready and all of that, like, but then tomorrow your customer says, hey, you know what, like, this API is good, but then we want to make enhancements, but I still want this API to go into production. I mean, versioning also becomes easier.
Well, versioning becomes possible because you have something to version, but it also, I don't know if it seems, I was surprised when you said easier, because if I have a lot of microservices, there are more things that need to have version numbers. If I just have one big program, it's number 1.5.6, the whole thing. Easy, right? But
Yeah, but
so
but also look at this, Ryan. Like if you have like multiple environments, and then you have to deal with like multiple customer bases and things like that. For a company like that, like those versions are that versioning. Like this is my customer base for this particular state.
yeah,
For an health insurance company, every the insurances happen based on the state, correct?
sure,
For an healthcare company.
yeah,
So when you do that for this state, these are the rules I can exclude, and you have multiple versions there, and you know how you labeled it, and then you just go pick those things, and then you run your pipeline. You are done.
without all the other ones.
Exactly.
Yeah, because there's 50 different states, and that
And I
would be a
don't
lot to
want to.
test.
I don't want to implement one big bulk service which will not add value, because like it is lying there. If somebody is not invoking that API, it's of no use.
I agree. That reminds me of something else that was on my notes from when we about your thinking on microservices. You really highlighted the element of service composition. So if I've got a bunch of little versioned components, tell me, what does composition have to do with that?
So composition basically be helpful in solving your process problems, Ryan. Okay, and then when you need to, I mean, like every process is little different. Like if you are working with a financial organization or a healthcare organization, or like anywhere the compliance is related, right? And each year so these compliance rules will change, correct?
Sure.
And then when these rules change, your versions will change.
Of what? So like,
I mean,
why
of your
don't you
API
tell
or like
this, to paint me the same picture, but use MuleSoft API led? Maybe we can. How would that look
so
in
you
API?
you have your system API version 1.0, which you are using for a particular state. Okay. Tomorrow you are adding another state for this particular healthcare provider, and then you have some bunch of same rules, but then you added a little bit, or like the data, the way they want to show the data is very different from how it was. It was in the previous API, and they said like due to some compliance, like you have to show the additional attributes of a particular customer, right?
Yeah.
And even for that reason, like when you are documenting your diagnosis, like what was the actual problem, and then in the problem, like you the from I mean, I'm just picking an example, like this may not be the exact thing. There may be some changes, and then all those changes you are implementing it, right?
Yeah, and it's where you have to implement them with service composition. So I have a project I was working on this week that I'm in. It's my software, so it's like I care. No customer is telling me I care about it. And if I want to make something different on the website, I might make a change in the experience API, and the version number would go up. But it might already have all the data it needs from all the underlying APIs, so those don't have to change, right? I just changed what's on the screen, so I changed the front end API, the experience API, and the rest of the APIs don't have to change.
Never have to change. Like for example, right concept, right? I mean, look at your experience API, experience API from web to mobile, two different versions, isn't it? And then web, you show everything. In mobile, you control the information, how much you want to show that.
Right, tiny screen.
Best example would be your transaction API, because you can only show certain number of transactions on a mobile interface versus like your web interface.
Right. So you would have to make two different APIs, and you'd have a microservice at the front end for the experience APIs that is changing whenever you make changes to the front end, and the back end APIs are fine.
Exactly.
Unless there's a change that needs to be done down there. So we're isolating changes in small units of software.
Correct. And also another example would be, Ryan, thinking out loud, the customer API, the customer sources, data sources may be different for different business units of the same enterprise.
Okay.
That could be possible. And then at that point of time, you may be bringing data for one customer object from Salesforce, the other from your legacy database. And then, since you have the definition already defined, the data model, you can use the same data model and then version it two different ways.
I I it, it may not be obvious. I have a project that you just described to a T, and you're not on the project, and it's a little eerie. It's exactly like my project. So very realistic example, everybody.
Yeah.
All right. What I'd like to do is I'd like to try to change. I don't want to change the subject exactly, but it's very abstract. Service oriented architecture and loose coupling and fine grained to coarse grained APIs are. I think people get the idea. It helps to bring it down to earth with a real with real MuleSoft technology. Can you kind of give an idea of when we do an API led solution? What does this look like?
So let's start. I already described your service contract, which you do it on your designer, and then loose coupling is where you basically kind of, not tying tightly to a particular system. Service abstraction is as you go from layer to layer, like system, process, and experience. Experience layer, it's completely abstract to you. You don't know anything about what's underneath, right? So that is what service abstraction. How we can relate service abstraction to our API-led architecture, and then we talked about service reusability. So now I have the account API. I don't need to write my account API multiple times. I already have that. So by reusing those components, I'm only spending say 60% of what I spent in my first iteration.
So reusing in MuleSoft, you mean REST API reuse through the version of the RAML that is published into Anypoint Exchange, and using it in the over and over in different client applications.
Exactly. Different projects, even when, you have 3-4 divisions, right? And then every division wants to use your customer data, right? Or your product data, right? Mm-hmm. If you have those APIs already done in your first iteration, they could be reusable.
Okay. And does API management play a part in the value there, or is it irrelevant?
API management, again, how you want to manage your APIs, what kind of policies, how you want to kind of whatever, how you want to show the data and things like that. Especially security is a key ingredient to the API when we write our APIs, how we are protecting our APIs, how we are not allowing the API clients to send in some garbled data and things like that. So we use various policies on your experience API where you do a OAuth authentication or JWT based authentication and things like that, and then you imply you basically set up some XML threat policy or JSON threat protection and all of that. So and then also when we are designing our APIs, this is a tip for all the folks here. Don't leave your objects or arrays open-ended. Don't say unbounded arrays. Unbounded arrays can lead you into trouble. It could go into. Somebody did something to introduce an XML bomb or a JSON bomb. Your data will be garbled and then your entire system can crash down. Yeah. So always have a bounded bounds defined on your arrays. Never leave them open-ended.
I think so, a lot of times when you're in, I teach classes. So when you're in the classroom and when you're in the beginning of a MuleSoft journey, some of these concerns seem like they're very far away. I'm not going to have anybody give a giant array to my service. I'm not going to have hackers breaking into my service. So part of having microservice architecture in reality, after over time in a successful implementation, you start to have new problems. And I think part of what you're describing is only a problem after you succeed, right? After you have good microservices. Is that what you think, or is that where these observations are coming from?
Again, like, architecture and design going hand in hand, Ryan. I mean, like, we have to take certain precautions, and then those precautions are to be your golden rules. Because, like, the way I look at it is, like, when I'm designing, I never have to go and fix anything in my code. Like, it has to come out right. When I deploy into production, I should never wake up to a production problem in the middle of the night.
That'd be nice.
That I mean, yeah, you cannot avoid certain situations depending on other factors. My design should not cause any kind of havoc in my production. That's the whole goal or the premise when I start designing my APIs or microservices.
Yeah, there's a commitment there that I hope the MuleSoft community is one of the champions of we're building reliable, durable, boring software that just works like the electrical system and the phone system and the plumbing. It just works. And we don't have to go tinker and fix it all the time, right?
Idea is value for the buck to the customer.
Yeah.
If I'm not adding value, I mean, then there is something fundamentally wrong.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about value, because Ramesh, thank you for your chat. I was looking in the Q&A, and Ramesh had a pretty interesting observation. I'm going to read it. I'm going to summarize, like I'm ChatGPT. Okay. So with fine-grained API, we're going to end up with a lot of little services. That's part of what we're assuming here.
Right.
And there's going to be a lot of operational effort to deploy and run and log and set settings and that kind of stuff. So that's a cost, right? And there's going to be more complex orchestrations that we need to make if we have to tie them all together. So now you've got orchestrator services, and we end up doing a lot of calls, which are going to cause more latency. And so what do you say to all of those costs?
Yeah, those are real problems, Ryan. I mean, like, no dispute in that. But then it all depends on, like, how you manage those things, right? See, I mean, like, now you talked about course. Okay, course is going to cost you more. But then at the same time, you have various deployment models. Why would I go and do it in Cloud Hub, right? Or Cloud Hub 1.0. I mean, like, there is Cloud Hub 2.0 for that, right? And then I can either go to RTF way of implementing it, like, where I can kind of, like, it also adds a lot of value. I mean, like, you are doing a Kubernetes based, container based deployment at that point of time. So there are various ways to tackle that. Like, modern architectures sometimes have both sides, right? And then how you balance those both sides, and then make sure that, like, you are successful in an enterprise. And yeah, definitely there is, you will be doing a lot of CI/CD deployments. Like, your deployment is kicking around. I mean, possibly every 5 minutes. Like, if you are working with, like, Netflix is the best example for that. Netflix has, like, more than 800 APIs, like, which they had. Like, now it could be more, but they were successful, and then we get the great content on Netflix.
Some of it's not so great. Huh? Some of the content's not so great.
It's okay. I mean, like, as long as I get good Indian movies,
it's reliably delivered, whether it's good or not.
But I think, like, the microservices was first very successful use case was from Netflix, actually.
Yeah, I think it's a valid observation.
There are ways to basically optimize whatever Ramesh has raised. Like, I understand the kind of there is always cost. I mean, even if you have a bulk API, I mean, that's gonna do the same thing to you. But then, if you have more APIs, granular APIs, your reusability will be more. I don't want to invoke an API for doing a small thing, a bulk API. I don't need to deploy that, right? See, there are always pros and cons. I mean, this is basically there is no end to it. If we kind of go and take this topic, there is no end to it. This argument can go on forever. But then, what is good for your setup, and then which deployment model will support you for that one, and then the other factors, right? Whether my organization, my enterprise is equipped to handle lots of microservices, their deployments, and all that. And an enterprise starting new, I would never suggest to go with the microservices architecture. If it is a matured organization, they have a robust CI/CD, and then they have done tons of containerization based projects in the past. I mean, why not? Take a risk and then go forward with it.
I'm going to add a question in here because there's good questions in the chat. I'm keeping track of them.
Please,
don't
please.
worry. But I wonder, and this is based on my own personal implementations. I don't have nearly the trouble with microservices that a lot of people predict I'm going to have. I mean, the cost and the latency and the operations. And I wonder if it's because of my experience. Do you think the architect's past experience with microservice architecture is a big factor in the success of an implementation? Or do you think the architecture stands on its own and the architect could be new?
So the way I look at it is, Ryan, I mean, microservices, depending on where you stand, what exactly you want for your organization. Based on that, you can make a decision, a cognizant decision at that point of time, right? I'm not saying one size fits all. That's not the approach you should be taking. Each customer is different. Each customer circumstances are different.
Yeah.
And each customer has a different architecture philosophy for their organization. Because when we are going in new, we need to also look at what this enterprise architecture philosophy is.
So let me make sure I get where you're going with this. The question was about the architect and the architecture, but it seems like you think it's much more relevant the customer, like the enterprise that the architecture is inside of.
Right. Okay. And Ryan, I mean, to be honestly speaking, right, whom do we solve problems for?
Right.
We are not solving problems for ourselves, right?
Right.
We are solving problems for the customer. Mm-hmm. And for each customer is different, each domain is different, and each customer will have their own philosophy of how they want to do their architecture. And then some may not agree on microservices at all.
Right.
I totally take that, but it also depends on, you can educate certain customers, and if they take it, they take it. They don't take it, that's okay. I mean, you have other ways to solve the problem.
Sure.
Microservices is only a way to solve the problems.
That's it.
I'm not saying that it is the way to solve the problem, but I'm saying this is also an option to solve your problem.
And it's an option that I think comes with a more, if I'm going to make a lot of little things, that's part of why I'm going to come to Himanshu's question here. Because if I want to make a lot of little pieces of software, it becomes very significant how I design the APIs and the interactions and the dependencies. But if I'm just going to design one big lump of software, then that doesn't matter. I can all have dependencies however I want on the inside, right? But I have to take the sacrifice of having a giant piece of software that's all one big monolith, right? So if I'm going to sign up for a microservice implementation, I have to now be responsible for all of those little dependencies in between the services, right? So I'm going to read Himanshu's question. It says, what's the ideal way to segregate the microservices? I think that's what he's asking about, is these dependencies. Should it be based on domains, or should it be based on IT systems?
I think it should be more based on bounded context. Basically, like say, domain is a very generic term, Himanshu, in my view. And if you talk about insurance, you have many different subdomains. And then when you're solving a problem for policy making or issuing a policy or something like that, you have something called code, you have something called binder, you have something called policy, which is issued to your customer. So now when you are solving a process problem, then you need to target what this context is, what APIs could constitute to basically solve this problem. Based on that, look at what data it needs, what attributes it needs. Let's talk about data later, but then what attributes it needs, and then how I can bring these attributes from the data which is available, what this process needs. And if the data is not there, let's have the data built for that. So I think it's easier to go with a bounded context, basically going it into micro domains rather than looking at it as whole big domain and then getting lost there. Divide and conquer is one of the best things when it comes to how you define your microservices based APIs, Himanshu.
So I see a big challenge for those who are listening to this and getting excited about microservice, or maybe the opposite, but looking at making some change to the way they design their service decomposition. Right? I think there is a question. I already have all this software that I've already been building, and I've already got all these APIs, and they're probably not all microservices, or maybe they are all microservices. If you wanted to go update or make a change to your microservice architecture and you've already got a bunch of stuff in place, what do you do?
See, Ryan, here is the thing, most enterprises, if they have things the way it is, nobody wants to disturb that. Right. But if there is somebody who wants to think little out of the box, and then, no, boss, I don't want to live in this one monolithic giant way of architecture. I want these things to be smaller and then meaningfully smaller. And at that point of time, yeah, it makes sense to do that exercise. See, it all depends on whom you are talking to, Ryan. Rather than I know this way and then I'm gonna do this way. It'll never work that way, and then and that's not gonna add value to anybody there.
So let's say you get the consensus. You still have to practically. Let's imagine that I'm the customer and I loved coming to the Architect Meetup, and I saw this beautiful future building a microservice architecture with
Right.
bounded context design and service composition and loose coupling. But what I have is 5 or 6 gigantic Mule applications,
Right.
that already integrate everything point to point, and they're not microservice. What am I going to do?
I think with MuleSoft, it makes it a lot easier because you also, whenever somebody is writing a reasonable code, you also make sure that you write it as modules and submodules, isn't it? And then when you segregate it that way, you also make sure that you kind of define your processes, sub-processes, and then where those lie and things like that. And then you kind of get that logic and then massage it a little bit and then move it around to create your new microservices. While this is all running in production, you can still do that. You can have a plan and then implement it out.
Is the plan, I guess what I'm asking, is the plan to slow down development of new enhancements and features and begin a separate work to decompose into microservices?
Exactly. Never disturb what you have. Basically, I also bring in I want to bring in one other thing, Ryan. When you go to a customer, the customer will say, oh, you know what, we brought this MuleSoft software, like, but then now I also have, like, a lot of my Java APIs and .NET APIs lying in my Kubernetes engine. And then how do you basically help me get these out of that? And then I said, like, okay, look, you already have them. We have Flex Gateway. Now I'm going to bring these APIs and then do all the API management with Flex Gateway for all your APIs already containerized. Now, after that, if you really feel that, like, why maintain this code in multiple places? I want to have one platform. It makes sense to bring it all onto one MuleSoft platform. At that point of time, you have a plan. You define which ones you want to target first. In phases, you bring all those APIs, develop them, and then bring it into MuleSoft. That could also be possible.
I think there's some relevance to Tanupam had a question. Let's say we make system APIs either by Flex Gateway or maybe we add a Mule layer, but one way or the other, we're going to have system APIs. And Tanupam's question is: do you choose to move the transformations to the process API? So this is a bounded context question. Do we move the transformations up to the process API and expose in-system data model out of the system API, or should we keep the transformations in the system API and expose a canonical model?
That is a good question, and then also it is a little tricky question. How you want to solve that is, like, maximum possible, like, keep your system APIs to CRUD operations. Do all your transformations in the process layer, because that way you are not adding a lot of load on your system APIs. It just gets you the data and then manipulate your data the way you want. Wow. I hope that answer your question.
Yeah,
or if you have any further questions on that part, like, please let me know. I mean, I'm happy to.
Yeah, no, I love it. It's fun. I love how this worked, because we started with the value of microservice and we got into domain-driven design and bounded context and IT management and man, I like it that people have opinions. I like to hear why, informed, experience-driven opinions. So I think that's probably good. I'm looking at it. We're at about time. So maybe I'll just give you a chance, like, if you wanted to leave people who came to this meetup or who watched the video with a message about the value of microservice architecture in integration, you tell them what you want to tell them.
I think basically the way I want to put it is it's a big value add. Like, when you take microservices approach, it may not work for every situation, but for the situations it will work. It will stick there, and then it will add more value. And it has to be decided by having few detailed workshops on, like, whether this will work for that particular customer or not. I mean, each customer is different. Each customer wants to solve their problems differently. Look at your problem. Look at your, like, philosophy. I mean, like, how you want to keep your things. I mean, are you someone who wants to kind of, like, go big way and solve everything, or, like, want to kind of, like, take piece by piece and then solve the problems? So either way, microservices are going to stay, and then they will add a lot of value. And it cut down cost. Like, this is one statement this is one concept which I want to explain. So when you have microservices, like, if you have big API, you deploy it. I mean, you probably, when you test it out, like, your 0.1 core is not sufficient, 0.2 core is not sufficient. You go to 1. I mean, this is for a cloud up situation. And then finally you feel that, like, man, this is, like, killing all my API, vCores. And then, like, my vCore management is becoming tiresome at this point of time. So why venture into that? Like, actually define it small. And then if you feel that, like, and your testing will become easier, your core allocation will become easier. You can test more APIs at one single point of time. So those are all some of the advantages. And then in my view, I mean, like, this is a personal view again. I'm not quoting anybody here. Like, don't take me. I mean, like, the way you want to interpret, you interpret it. The way I interpret, or like, according to me, microservices are going to stay, and then they will bring value to your enterprise.
Thank you. I'm super grateful that you, let me do this. I'm super grateful that you took the time to schedule this with me and to help organize the first architect meetup and to bring your your real life experience with designing real software out of microservice architecture for integration at enterprises. I'm sure that the community is really going to appreciate it. So Aravind, thank you very much.